Well, if it isn't my favorite little pupil, are you back to listen to another lecture? You're always so attentive. Well, recently, I've been reading up on Lugh and Balor. They come from Irish mythology. Does that sound interesting? Okay, have a seat. So, Lugh and Balor, they are very important figures in Celtic lore, actually. Kind of like some of the figures that I've told you about in the past. Their story is all about a final fight between the old and the new order. Almost like a fight between light and darkness. It's pretty cool. So, let's start with Balor. He is this, like, one-eyed, tyrannical king of the Fomorians, which are these destructive, chaotic beings that are associated with the usual chaos themes that you find in mythology. You know, darkness, death, that kind. Basically, they're giants, known as those who occupied Ireland years and years ago. In other words, Balor is basically a giant cyclops. Literally. So, he's big and he's got this one giant eye, and his giant eye is his most deadly weapon. Which, I know. How can someone kill you with an eye? Well, it turns out that anything that he would see would die or wither away, at least according to myth. Basically, his eye was huge and heavy-lidded and was sealed shut. If for whatever reason it ever needed to be opened, it would require about 4 warriors with hooks or poles to try to pry it open during battle. Now, in fantasy, not saying that this isn't, but you know what I mean. Most people hear the phrase death eye and probably think of like some eye that shoots out a beam or a laser that will literally turn you to dust, but this eye apparently doesn't do that, depending on what sources you read. Like, it still does that, but not the laser part. So, the eye itself, when opened, it would scorch the land, or it would wither crops, or it could kill warriors instantly, or even cause diseases or blights. And I know the scorching part kind of sounds like a laser beam, but trust me, it isn't. Like, imagine if you woke up and you burned a hole through your ceiling just because you opened your eyes. Anyway, in some versions of the story, the eye shoots out this, like, poisonous energy or a burning light, but in other texts, it just says that anything that the eye looks at will die or decay. So imagine you have a flower in front of you, and if you open your eyes to look at it, it just dries out and withers. So, like I said, it kind of depends on what source you read. The closest thing to a beam that there ever was in any of these stories was more of like an aura than a beam of light. But, I mean, I'd say that's kind of the same thing. Still, I'm more inclined to think it's like the Medusa stare. You know, the snake woman with snake hair that would turn people to stone if they stared at them. Anyway. This eye was so destructive. It had to have, like, 9 layers of skin over it to prevent it from wreaking havoc. Because once the eye itself was fully opened, it would annihilate anything in its path. Anyway, enough about Balor and his evil eye, at least for now. Let's move on to Lugh. So, Lugh was this young god of the Tua de Danann. Their name basically means the folk of the goddess Danu. In other words, they're a pantheon of gods of this land. As for Danu, there's actually not too much that we know about her, but I'll look more into her later and let you know if I find just anything interesting. Anyway, Lugh represents the opposite that Balor does. He specifically represents light, arts, war, and sovereignty. He was known as Lugh Lamfada. I couldn't find an actual pronunciation for it, so I'm kind of guessing here. So basically, he's Lugh of the Long Arm. Like, that's his full name. He also excels in every craft and skill. He's this divine polymath, aka someone who knows a lot about many, many, many things, and is at a level beyond that of an expert. And of course, he's a solar figure. In other words, a sun god, since he represents light and all. So, he's very, 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 very important to the Celtic pantheon. Anyway, there was a prophecy involving Lugh's future birth. Basically, Balor would be killed by his own grandson. So, to prevent this, Balor imprisoned his daughter, Inu, in a tower. But she still gets pregnant by Cian, a warrior of the pantheon. And she then gives birth to Lugh and raises him in secrecy to protect him from Balor's wrath. Lugh is often referred to mostly as Simuldanach, which just means possessor of all arts, or someone who's very good at everything. When he approaches the pantheon for the first time, they deny him entry until he proves that he's more than just a warrior, but that he's also a poet, a harpist, a smith, craftsman, physician, and magician. Once the gatekeeper realizes who he's talking to, they let him in. Unlike most warrior gods, which are usually just brash and violent, he specifically relies on tactics and leadership, using his cleverness and charisma. But that doesn't mean that he can't be rough when he needs to. He had this strong spear, known as the Spear of Asal, which no enemy could withstand. Some sources would describe it as being so hot, it would need to be stored in a container full of water so that it wouldn't burn everything. He is also the grandfather of Cuchulainn, another Irish hero that I might tell you about later. But anyway, skipping ahead a little bit, the Fomorians, being evil and all, oppress the pantheon, and Lugh rises up to lead them to battle. During this battle, a few things happen depending on your source, but basically, Balor opens his evil eye and kills everything in its path. Lugh then uses a sling or a spear to strike Balor in the eye, which pushes it out of his skull, which is mondo grody, or, sorry, it's quite grotesque. Anyway, the eye ends up looking at the Fomorians, which basically results in them dying, and like the prophecy said, Lugh kills his grandfather, and the Fomorians are defeated. Pretty neat, huh? Compared to some of the other myths I've told you about, this one was pretty gruesome in its climax, but very interesting nonetheless, I think. A lot of people know about European mythology, but not many focus or study those of Ireland or the Celts for some reason. Even ancient English ones are very different, like Gogmagog, who was this like ancient giant that lived in Britain. Well, I mean, there's a lot of giants in European myth, if I'm honest. But I can tell you more about those next time, when I read up on them again. Okay? Did you enjoy my mini lecture? Well, thank you for always being here, listening to me talk about stuff that interests me. It always makes me a bit happier, having someone hear me talk about stories or myths. I wonder what I should read for next time. Hmm. Well, that's something you'll just have to wait to hear, huh?